truth, and life. Here is the Brother Leon Show. You better recognize.
What's going on, listeners? This is your boy, Brother Leon, and you are tuning into another episode of the Brother Leon Show. So today, guys, we are going to bring the thunder. I'm telling you today, this interview is going to be all up in your cabinets because we're going to talk about porn addiction. And the one thing nobody wants to talk about is that there are people dealing with this silent struggle. So let's go on in here. The one thing that I want you guys to understand and know is that the issue of porn addiction, it's one of those silent addictions, because people can say, hey, I'm addicted to alcohol, I'm addicted to drugs. But when you start talking about sex addiction, when you start talking about porn addiction, a lot of people want to try to keep that on the low because of the stigma that comes with it, the shame that comes with it. Because the one thing about it, man, porn addiction is like a beautiful octopus. It's inviting. It looks friendly at first. And one thing that I'm going to tell you about porn and give you the contrast about life is that in life you're going to get rejected, but porn never rejects you. You will never get rejected by porn. A guy who's wants to be accepted by women, he will never get rejected by porn. Same thing goes for girls. You a gal, you a woman, and you want to, talk to a guy, and you see certain type of men that you want to hook up with, and they reject you. The one thing about porn will never reject you. But here's the flip side to it. Once it gets a hold of you, it can grab you and never let you go. And it's almost like you have to fight to be free. So today on the show, we are going to have Mr. Joshua Shea, and he is going to come and give his expertise and knowledge on this addiction. So I'm so excited, man, the way that God wants to go, the way that God wants to reveal. So, hey, guys, sit back. We're going to have Mr. Shea on in a few.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing, Mr. Joshua Shea? This is Brother Leon.
I am doing fantastic today. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to hear your voice. I'm going to give you some applause. So I was just telling the listeners, and this is, you can critique my explanation. I told the listeners that porn is almost like a beautiful octopus. It's inviting to a certain degree, and you're very curious. And the one thing about porn is that it never rejects you. And so once you get in close to it, it grabs you, and sometimes it don't never want to let you go.
That is perfect. When I gave a TED Talk last year, I actually labeled it the twisted tentacles of porn addiction. So
Okay.
I would say you are dead on.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Let me give you some applause for that. Thank you. So I just want to begin. Can you tell us who you are, sir?
Yeah, my name is Joshua Shea. I am a porn addiction expert. I am also a certified betrayal trauma coach, and I myself suffered with porn addiction for 24 years and alcoholism for 22.
Wow. Okay. So you tell us about the part about the trauma part.
Yeah, betrayal trauma. I kind of stumbled into this. I wrote my first book about 4 years ago. It was an autobiography. It was about my struggle with pornography addiction. And I put it out there, and I thought that's the only thing that I would do. I figured I might get one or two, addicts who contact me. But what I had was all of a sudden a ton of email from the partners of porn addicts, usually a wife, but it could be a girlfriend, it could be a husband. And they wanted to know how they could get their partner to be cured of porn addiction. The way that, I say you're never cured, you're in recovery, but I went through it, and I went through it successfully, and they wanted to know how to do that for their partner, but they also wanted to know if they would ever feel better. And this was where I really learned about the idea behind betrayal trauma. Okay. And betrayal trauma, most traditionally, is found when one spouse or one partner cheats on another. But essentially, it's any massive trauma that happens when you think you can count on something so incredibly, whether it's your partner or your parents or just the world around you, and all of a sudden you find out with no warning that what you 100% believe to be true is 100% false. And that fallout is what is known as betrayal trauma, as you try to make sense of this new world where white is black and black is white and things are opposite what you thought they were. Trying to get through that process is called betrayal trauma.
Wow. Thank you for that, sir. Thank you for that. That is definitely good.
You're welcome.
So I see you're an author and everything. Can you tell us about some of your books?
Yeah, as I mentioned, my first book was an autobiography. It looked at the last 4 or 5 years of my porn and alcohol addictions. It looked back on, what helped to create them, how I mishandled them. And it's all told within the story of me starting a company. I started a magazine company here in Maine where I live. And it's told through those eyes because as the company started, that's when things really took off and led me to rock bottom about 5 years later. As I mentioned, I got a huge amount of response from partners for that first book. So I wrote my second book specifically for partners. Okay. And that's called He's a Porn Addict, Now What? And that one I co-wrote with a friend of mine who's a therapist. And it's a simple Q&A format where we took about 60 of the most popular questions that women ask about their, after finding out that their male partner is a porn addict. So he answered those from the point of view, he is the expert because he's the therapist, and I am a different kind of expert because I experienced it. And so that book went out. That book was incredibly popular. It still sells more than any of the other books. And then my most recent book came out about a year ago. That was called Porn and the Pandemic, How 3 months in 2020 Changed Everything. Because my profession by nature for 25 years was a journalist. Yeah. And I love research and I love writing stories. And I just knew that online pornography was going to change once COVID hit. Yeah. And I was absolutely right. We crammed 10 years worth of internet pornography into about 5 months.
Wow. Oh my God.
Yeah. Nobody was going anywhere. Yeah. So people were either at home looking at porn or they were on OnlyFans making porn. That's what the pandemic did for that, Yeah. Before the pandemic, here's a crazy statistic. Okay. Before the pandemic, so we'll say January 1st, 2020, there were 300,000 people making pornography on OnlyFans. And just about 2 weeks ago, when they announced that they weren't going to put pornography standards in place, OnlyFans mentioned that they had 2 million people making content on their site. Wow. So during the pandemic, we saw an increase of 1.7 million people making pornography just on OnlyFans.
Oh my God.
That's you would never have that happen if we were not all stuck at home. If there were a lot of people who didn't have to make money quickly, that's the fallout of. And I'm not blaming any of them. You do what you have to do, but that's the fallout of the pandemic.
Oh my God. And I knew, at first they were going to take pornography content off, and then they changed their mind, and I was like, all right. And now it's like anybody can make porn now. It's not just limited to the studios. And
the thing is, there are so many people in this world that no matter what your body type, no matter what your personality, no matter your age, no matter, anything, you will find somebody out there who will pay for it. Obviously certain people make more money, but you will find there is somebody for somebody out there when it comes to pornography, when you look at some of those crazy genres they have.
Yeah, exactly. So, Mr. Shea, there are some people out here who say, oh, porn addiction, that's a myth. I don't believe in it. And I tell people, I'm like, no, it's not a myth. Just like sexual addiction, people, they downplay that as well. So can you break down, that whole thing about porn addiction being a myth? And I'm like, it's not a myth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at this point, it's a matter of science because we have been studying this now for 20 years. Okay. Once super speed internet came up, which if you remember 20 years ago, it's just when we stopped doing those dial-up modems that made those fax noises and we started getting onto some really fast internet, that we have studied people who have watched porn back to that time. Yeah. And we know that porn rates are increasing. And we also know that addiction, it doesn't matter if it's drugs, alcohol, gambling, food, sex, pornography, we know that it is a disease because we can study the brain and see what happens and the brain changes during when the person is using too much of whatever their addictive substance is. The wiring in the brain that goes to the pleasure centers actually changes. And this is seen throughout all addiction. What a lot of people don't realize, Brother Leon, is that addiction is addiction is addiction is addiction. Yes, obviously, there is a difference between heroin addiction and food addiction. With food addiction, you may get super fat. With heroin addiction, obviously, there's a whole bunch of health issues that come with it. But what's going on in the brain is exactly the same. I tell people that, food addiction doesn't take place in the stomach, and gambling addiction doesn't take place in the wallet, and sex addiction doesn't take place between the legs. All addiction takes place in the brain. And that's what people have to realize is that what the symptoms of addiction are absolutely go in line with people who look at too much pornography and what they report as far as becoming obsessed with it, as far as planning their days around it, as far as starting to, get in trouble at school or work because they were caught looking at porn, or simply they might be up all night looking at porn, so their work performance starts to go down. Ultimately, if you don't want to call it an addiction, don't call it an addiction. Call it a obsession. Call it a bad habit. Call it whatever you want. It's just a label. If you have a problematic relationship with pornography, you know it. Yeah,
exactly. Thank you for that. Thank you for clarifying that, Mr. Shea. I so appreciate you. So let me ask you this. How did you get into the field of identifying pornography addiction?
Well, I was a pornography addict back to the age of 12 years old. I was an alcoholic back to the age of 14. And if you go back to, 2009 to 2013, I was running my magazine. But during that time, I also became a city councilor in the city that I lived in. I also started an international film festival with a couple of other business owners. And I was straight out ridiculously busy, and things started to get stressful and tough, and I couldn't quite balance things at home by trying to be a good husband and a good father, and work was starting to suffer, and I was just spreading myself too thin. So I took myself off. I take a anti-anxiety medication because I have bipolar disorder, and I took myself off of that pill, hoping that I would be able to stay awake more, hoping that I would have a little more energy, be a little more creative, and help to, make my professional endeavors go even better. But what happened was when I got off the pills, the addictions got even worse. and it was within 3 weeks I was drinking 4 or 5 times what I normally was. I was looking at porn, 5 times what I normally was. And it didn't take long before my professional life started falling apart. I mean, really falling apart. My personal life started falling apart. And finally, there was just, this moment of reckoning in early 2014 where it was a matter of I need to get help or I'm going to lose. I lost my job. Despite the fact that I was 1/4 owner of the company and I ran the day-to-day, I got fired because I was just a mess at that point. And I had lost my job. I was very close to losing my family. I was probably sleeping 3 hours a night. Had I not gone and got help, I don't know if I would be here today. And basically, it was just this wake-up call at rock bottom that I need to go and change my life around. And one of the things that I first went to alcohol rehab. That's where I learned about porn addiction.
Okay.
And in that rehab, I met with a specialist off campus, and he introduced me to the concept of porn addiction. And he's the one who made me realize that, some uncool stuff happened to me at the hands of a babysitter when I was a kid, and that I kind of used pornography to cope with it over the years. I didn't deal with the trauma of what happened, and that's how I fell into pornography. And then it became a crutch for me when it came to any anxiety or any stress for 24 years. And it wasn't, I thought that I looked at a lot of porn just because I was drunk, but it was a separate addiction, and it was an addiction that lasted even longer. And in a lot of ways, it was a tougher addiction to work through and recover from than the alcohol. I feel like the porn had a real grip of my brain, where the alcohol was more about numbing my brain.
Okay.
But that's how I learned about pornography addiction. When I returned home from that rehab, I went to the bookstore to look for books about pornography addiction. There was nothing there. Yeah. And I could find academic papers online, and I don't mind reading academic papers. I actually like that kind of research. But I know the average guy doesn't read those kinds of papers. The average guy isn't reading the New England Journal of Medicine. And I decided at that point that I was going to become a writer for it, and write for the average guy who isn't going to read this college level stuff. So that's why I started to write my books. And then I started doing the coaching, both porn addicts and the partners who have betrayal trauma, because I couldn't find anybody at the time when I needed it. So I figured I'm going to write these books, and I'm going to be there for people the way that there just wasn't anybody there for me 7 or 8 years ago.
Wow. I like that. I so applaud you for that. So here's my biggest question. You were comparing, you were saying that the porn addiction was more tougher than the alcohol addiction. And I've heard people say things along those lines, and I'm like, how? Well,
first, porn is easier to hide.
Yeah.
Number one, because, you smell the alcohol on someone. You can hear them slur. Maybe they're walking funny. Yeah. Maybe they have major mood swings. It's kind of easy to spot somebody who's an alcoholic or somebody who has been drinking.
Yeah.
But frankly, I can come in from the other room and you don't know I've just been looking at pornography because everything else is the same about me. So it's not hard to hide. That's the first big part of it. Okay. Is that people don't find you out the way they may find you out with other addictions.
Okay, I see that. Here's another question, going back to the spouses, because I've heard people say that I can't compete with that. I can't compete with the fact that he wants to look at porn, and a lot of women compare themselves and they torture themselves because they don't look like the porn star that he looks at.
Right. Right.
And a lot of women torture themselves. Can you talk on that?
Yeah, and there's two separate things here. First, we have to realize that there are recreational users of pornography, men and women who can view it and there's nothing wrong with it, and they have no problem with it. Now, for instance, myself, I go to a nearby casino 2 or 3 times a year to have dinner with my wife, after dinner we play slot machines, and I win $30, I lose $20, whatever, it doesn't matter, and then I leave. That's because I don't have that gambling addiction DNA. Yeah. I'm fine with it. I can gamble and walk away. It's not that much of an interest to me. So, if there can be people who gamble, or if there can be people who drink alcohol and don't develop problems, obviously there are people who can view pornography and not develop problems. However, with me, I was not looking at the pornography to just see, pretty naked ladies or see people having sex or anything like that. It was doing something for the addiction in my head. It was calming my mind. It was giving me the dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin and all of those little pleasure chemicals. Yeah. It was giving them all to me, and that's what I was after. It didn't matter what was on the screen exactly. I didn't care if I didn't care what the color of the person was. I didn't care if it was, 2 girls or 6 girls or 3 guys and 1 girl. It didn't matter. It didn't matter anything about it. I was just looking for that piece of porn that would tickle my brain and tell me that, and give me that burst of chemicals that I needed. Yeah. And that really was what an addict becomes a slave to, is that little feeling of you need this high. And it is, and when it comes to drinking, it's a similar high. Years ago, I smoked a lot of marijuana in my early 20s, and it was that same kind of high. And it's also the kind of thing where it tells you that you need this stuff. You need this stuff. You, like I said, when you're addicted, you plan your day around it. I don't care what's on the screen. I'm trying to calm the storm in my brain because I'm an addict. Now, for those people who are recreational users, yes, there are some people out there who will pick porn over their partner. Yeah. That should tell you where their priorities are. Yeah. It's not that, it's not that you're not pretty. It's not that you're not special. It's that they have decided that they would rather look at porn and masturbate than be with you. And that can be for 100 different reasons. Yeah. And I actually tell women, you may, emotionally, you may be better off finding out that your partner is an addict, because at least he has a sickness. I can tell you, as an addict, it wasn't picking porn over my wife or picking porn over any girlfriend or that. Cause, actually laying down with somebody and making love with them who was very special and being intimate is a very different thing than trying to make the addiction in your brain calm down. Yeah. Those are 2 very, very different things. Okay. For an addict. For somebody who isn't an addict, it may or may not be, but for the wife of an addict, they should be able to take a little bit of relief in that, he's sick. This isn't him picking porn over me. Yeah. This is him picking porn because he thinks he's going to die if he doesn't have it. Yeah. He may actually physically get sick if he doesn't have it. Yeah. And that's what is, I would guess, say, the one silver lining of addiction when you're a partner. Yeah. There's the trauma's still there, the betrayal is still there, but when you are the partner of an addict, it is never your fault. And most of the time, even if you're the partner of someone who's running off and not choosing you, it's not your fault. Yeah. Something is wrong with them. Something, if they don't want to be with you, it might not be they're rejecting you. It might be they're rejecting the intimacy. And they're not comfortable with intimacy. It has nothing to do with your body. They could be there with a supermodel, and it would be the same thing. Yeah, exactly. Don't be so fast to blame yourself in these situations.
I like that. Let me ask you this: what if a person finds out, a spouse finds out, okay, he's addicted to porn, and they start to believe, well, if I give him more sex, maybe he'll break it. Have you ever come across that?
I have come across that belief, and I can promise you that it has never ever worked. Okay. If you can try to create the fantasy land that he looks at in pornography, but number 1, are you actually comfortable with that? Yeah. And number 2, you're not actually going to cure anything. It's like, somebody who has 2 bad knees, putting them in a wheelchair and wheeling them around. you're not actually fixing anything.
Yeah.
You're just kind of putting a bit of a Band-Aid on the problem. The problem is still there. You're not dealing with it.
Okay. I like that. Thank you for that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Music to my ears.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Here's my next question. Can porn addiction lead to sexual addiction?
There is no direct correlation between it in that it will, but those people who are sex addicts, and by sex addict, I assume you mean intercourse addict,
Yes.
That those people who are intercourse addicts usually are also porn addicts, but porn addicts are very rarely intercourse addicts. When it comes to men, and forget addiction, with intercourse, but a guy who is really into pornography, he will only step outside his marriage or his relationship or whatever 15% of the time if he's got a problem with pornography, whereas a woman who has problem with pornography, she will step out and actually act on it and act out with somebody between 70 and 80% of the time.
Wow.
So taking it into real life away from pornography, as far as addicts go, women do it 3 to 4 times more than men do. And there are different theories as to why, but it's really a woman issue when it comes to that.
Wow. Let me give you some applause, because that goes right into my next question. Is porn addiction just a guy thing?
Absolutely not. In fact, if you look at the statistics, the number 2 place that you're seeing growth in pornography addiction is with women, because you're looking at it this way: men were when pornography in the 60s and 70s was about going to a movie theater, they basically just targeted straight men because they knew they could get them into a theater. And because it cost a lot of money to create a pornography movie, to distribute a pornography movie way back when. So you needed to sell tickets for theaters. And it's one of those things where they went after a target audience. Now, with the internet, pornography can be created so cheaply and so quickly that you can create it for a niche audience. So you see a lot more of these niches, and one of the biggest that was not served in the past when it was videotapes or actual movies was women.
Yeah.
And now women who maybe wouldn't go into the adult theater, women who wouldn't go into a video store and rent a porno, they can now watch it from home. And they don't have to worry about being embarrassed going out, because that's the kind of stuff that was holding them back. Guess what? Women are just as sexual as men. And guess what? It doesn't matter whether you're black or white or Asian or Latino. You're probably, interested in sex. We're all interested in sex. Sex is why we got here.
Yeah.
And now that the porn can be delivered to you so easily and so discreetly, you're seeing a lot of religious people get addicted to pornography. Yeah. You're seeing a lot of minorities who didn't have access or look at pornography as much 25, 30 years ago. You're seeing them get addicted. Ironically, if you look at straight white men, it's one of the lowest growing addiction rates, because we've been dealing with it for, 40 years anyway, because the porn was geared towards us 40 years ago. Now it's just geared towards anybody who will watch, because they're not making money on the porn. They're making on the money on the ads around the porn.
Yeah, exactly. So let me ask you this. Let me give you some applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you. You're beautiful.
Thank you for that. Do you see, the one thing that I'm curious about now is, how does the sex toy industry, does porn addiction also cater to the sex toy industry as well?
Well, I assume that if people are getting much more comfortable with purchasing toys because they are in the pornos, people are becoming more comfortable with sex in general. Because you got to think about this, with somebody who is 30 years old or younger, they grew up with the internet. Those of us who were older, we had to find a videotape. We had to find a magazine.
Exactly.
And we were raised by parents and grandparents who maybe they didn't mean to, but, might have shamed us about our bodies or might have made us think that nudity or sex is something you don't talk about, you don't look at, you don't think about. A lot of the older generations did that. They were much more conservative. But the people under 30 years old have had really just unfettered access to the most hardcore, unique, extreme pornography on the internet for as long as you can imagine. So their views of the people under 30, their views of sex and nudity are much more liberal and much more open-minded than those of people who are over 30. And what you're seeing a shift in the mentality of people. And my real point for going out and doing your show and talking in colleges and in churches and stuff is to let people know that, it's not that I'm anti-pornography, it's that I'm anti-unhealthy sexuality. And unhealthy sexuality is not understanding what can happen to you when you look at pornography. And that's all I want people to know. Much like, is there anybody in this country who picks up a cigarette for the first time who's over 15 and doesn't understand that it's bad for them? Now, that doesn't say they can or can't use it. It's totally legal to use it. Yeah. Much like alcohol. You turn 21, totally legal. Make your own decision. Yeah. And pornography is the same way, but we understand alcohol can hurt you. We understand cigarettes can hurt you. And it's up to you to make your own decision when you're an adult. Yeah. But pornography is like this as well. And we need people to understand that.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Because I think a lot of times, I'm not going to lie, I'm going to give you some of my life experience. I remember when my mom, oh my God, I was young, and my mom, she went into my porn stash. I call myself hiding it. Oh man, she took that magazine. My mom beat me all upside my head with the magazine that she found. I remember it just as clear as day. But I think, as a youth, it's almost as if, looking at the porn, it was the curiosity. And then being in church, they always talked about, fornication, you're going to go to hell, having sex outside of marriage. And I'm like, I just want to know, and the crazy thing is that I learned sexuality through pornography. It was the wrong way, but it was the way that was available, because if I talk to you about it in church, you're going to, I'm demonized.
Right.
And that's
right. Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
And that's the one thing that I didn't understand about the church, because it's like, if you don't talk about it, you're going to end up seeing it one way or another. So how come we can't have healthy discussions about sexuality?
Exactly. And that's one of my big, criticisms, is that it's okay to talk. And you actually probably get the desired behavior out of people. I was raised Catholic, but I was always told, don't do this. Okay, why don't I do it? Well, because it's just God's law, or it's in the Bible. It's like, oh, you don't know why I do it. You don't do it. You don't want me to do it, but you've done no critical thinking about this. And I think that's, hurt the church a lot. But I just want to tell you a really quick story, which is perfect for what you're talking about. The last time I was in a college, it was a long time ago, because nobody had any visitors last year. Most people weren't even in college. But I was at a college giving a little talk about pornography addiction to a women's sexuality group at a health center, probably about 20 women there. And at the end of it, one of the women, who was probably 19 or 20, raised her hand and said, have you heard of women around my age who don't want to have sex with virgin men? And I said, no, what does that have to do with pornography? And she said, well, I think it's that fault. And I looked around, I saw a lot of women in the room, 19, 20, 21 years old, nodding. And I was like, okay, I'm curious now, what's this about? And she said to me, and the other girls chimed in because we had a discussion about this, but she said that she did not want to have sex with virgin guys who she meets at college because pornography was their sex education. And think about pornography, even the most vanilla, boring, missionary position pornography, one man, one woman. The man is usually, grabbing her by the throat at some point. The man is usually saying horrible things, making her call him daddy, bending her like a pretzel, usually being more aggressive. And that doesn't even get to the point that most of these, end horribly. And, these women said to me, well, especially at the college level where you get a lot of guys who maybe they aren't sexually experienced, maybe they never, got with someone in high school. Well, they're finally in college. They finally have a girl who's interested. And when it starts getting hot and heavy, they start acting like a porn star. And they grab the woman or throw them on the bed or start, saying derogatory things to them. And those of us who have had normal sexual relationships with people, we understand that pornography is fiction. We understand that pornography is not a documentary. It's not a reality show. Pornography is complete fiction. Normal people don't do it like that.
Yes.
But if you've been watching, think about it. If you watch one or two videos a week going back to being 13 years old, when you're 18 or 19, you've seen thousands of videos.
Yeah.
And you have this belief of how a man should act in a sexual situation. And so you've got this generation of young men who are trying to act like porn stars when they're finally getting with a girl. And these girls of this younger generation are saying, whoa, no, you don't act like that. And having had to deal with these kinds of guys, instead of having to retrain them or having to teach them they're behaving wrong, these women just don't want to be with these guys.
Wow.
And it's because pornography was their sex education. Now, not all of these guys are porn addicts. The vast majority of them are not porn addicts. But this shows you how porn can change society.
Wow. Thank you for that. Because I was reading a while back, and I might have read this on social media. It was a guy who accidentally killed his girlfriend while they were having sex. He choked her out.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, look at the amount of guys who accidentally kill them or strangle themselves masturbating.
Yeah.
Not healthy.
No, not healthy at all. Not healthy at all. But I mean, it goes back, like you were saying. When I was looking at porn, I was like, yo, I need me a girl to look just like that, who can do just that right there. And, looking back then and looking forward now, it's like, that was so unrealistic. And,
you never met that girl, did you?
Never. Even if I went to and she's a retired porn star now. And I'm like, even if I did, meet her, I'm like, she wouldn't be what I saw on film, because it's like,
no.
You gotta tell people, like, yo, man, porn is nothing but about the money shot.
Right. Well, exactly. And if Rambo or Die Hard or these superhero movies are obviously fake, can't you understand that this is fake too? This is not how people, behave with each other. This is not the way it really works. It's a lot more boring with a lot less sounding like a wounded animal.
Yeah. I want to change it up a little bit.
Sure.
So I want to go into the whole, dealing with your partners and everything. So how does porn addiction affect the partners? Well,
it really depends upon if pornography was part of your relationship previously or not. There are some people who, they watch pornography as a couple, and it's part of their life. Maybe they go to a strip club together. Maybe they, however they do it. If one person develops a problem, the other person really needs to be careful about their use and not do it as a couple anymore, and maybe not even introduce it in the house, not have it in the house, because this person is an addict. However, because this person is an addict, they need to get help, and you need to encourage them to get help. Again, remember, addiction is a brain disease, and you can get better from it, and you can learn to cope with it, and you can learn why it happened. I mean, I did all of those things, and now I help people discover all those things. But that's what needs to be done. And it doesn't mean that your sex life is over. It doesn't mean that there is a lack of love between you. It doesn't mean anything aside from the fact that for some reason, a piece of his brain was craving something and he found, or she found, because it can be either way, that person found that pornography somehow calms the storm in their mind. And, and if you're not anti-pornography, it's fantastic because, and I'll tell you, this is also part of the church thing. If the church, says how horrible all this stuff is, yet I still develop a problem anyway, do you think I'm going to go and talk to, my priest or my rabbi or something like that? Because they're just going to shame me. Yeah. They're just going to say bad. That's not how you get people to talk. That's not how you get people to feel better. Exactly. People stay sick when they think they can't talk to anybody. So if you are the spouse of a porn addict, number one, don't judge them. If you hate porn, I know that's a lot harder than if you're okay with it, but don't judge them. They are not the porn that they looked at. And they are not the porn that they looked at with you. But if they didn't even watch porn with you, it was just themselves, and you discover they looked at something gay or they looked at something with, transvestites, or they looked at whatever, that doesn't mean that they're interested in that stuff. All that means is that's what calmed the storm in their mind that day. And don't judge them for looking at it, no matter how you feel. And also create a safe space. If somebody is going to get better, if somebody is going to go through the process of recovery, they're going to be vulnerable. They're going to feel depressed some days. They're going to feel ashamed some days. You need to create an environment where they don't feel worse and they feel like they are safe and they can say anything. And it's a place that they can get better. The only way you're going to heal emotionally is if you're in an environment where you feel safe enough to heal. And having somebody who is making you feel bad about a problem you never wanted is not going to make that healing happen.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you for that. Here's another question. What about some spouses or even significant others who may say, or feel like this is my fault? Have you ran across that? Some people blame themselves for another person's addiction?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they're the kind of people who were using drugs and got into a relationship, introduced their partner to drugs, and then their partner really went off the deep end. I guess what I would say is, number one, did you do it on purpose? Obviously, you probably did not. Even if you introduced pornography or if you encouraged your partner to look at pornography, you can't make anybody do anything. It was their choice. Unless you've got a gun to their head, and that's a completely different set of chemicals going on in their mind at that point, you are not going to create an addict. You cannot force anybody to do something that they don't want to do. You can wreck the relationship trying to introduce it if the person's very anti-porn, but there's nothing that you can do to give somebody a porn addiction. There's nothing you can do to make anybody watch porn. And I would hope that if you knew that they had any kind of inkling of being a porn addict, you might start removing it from the situation. But to blame yourself is to look for an answer that maybe it's easy, or maybe you're the kind of person who needs drama or needs the spotlight on you. But I promise you that while you may have created conditions that made addiction easier, the addiction is on the other person. It's on them, and it's a horrible disease, and it's a hell of a thing to try to get through. But my addiction was my issue.
Yeah. Okay, I like that. Thank you for that, Mr. Shea. So here's my next question. My next question is, does rejection play into porn addiction at times?
It can, because rejection will prompt depression. Depression creates a different set of chemicals going on in your mind. And a lot of times, the chemicals in your mind when you are depressed are trying to fix the depression. And if you have some tendencies towards, using pornography, you may go toward that, and it can become like a cycle. One of the things that you see with addicts is that they're always making deals with themselves, and they're not able to keep them. Like, tonight I'm only going to drink 2 beers, and then you have a 6-pack. Or tonight I'm only going to look at porn for 20 minutes, and then 2 hours later you're still looking. That's kind of what happens in that case. If you make these promises to yourself, you try to keep things in line, you tell yourself it's not an addiction. But if people are looking out there, and if people are nodding that, oh yeah, I've tried to convince myself not to use so much, or I've tried to convince myself not to go there, that it's just impossible. That's a good sign that there's an addiction there.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that, sir. Thank you. So let me ask you this, because I know a lot of times people talk about the LGBTQ community. Porn addiction is not just limited to just heterosexuals, but also the LGBTQ community, because addiction is addiction. And a lot of people
absolutely.
Okay. Go.
Absolutely. And the only study that I've ever seen shows that straight people have the highest rankings of porn addiction right now across the country, according to this most recent study I saw, which it was pre-pandemic, so these numbers are probably off a bit now, but it was basically that around 18% of people identified saying that they watch too much pornography. That's men, women, all ages, straight across the board. About 18% of straight people. It was about 15% of gay people, and it was about 8% of bisexual people. When you move into things like pansexual and some of these other designations that are now being used, I haven't seen any studies on those, but yeah, it obviously it hits any person, because it's like diabetes or cancer or alcoholism or anything else. People have to recognize that addiction is a medical condition.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, sir. So, and this probably start winding down on my questions. How do you deal with porn addiction, in your children? Like, say, like you got like teen boys or teen girls. It's like, and you find out that they have an addiction. How can you begin to help them, or even get to the place where they can come and talk to you?
Well, I mean, if they're under 18, you can do a lot. If they're over 18, you need their permission for pretty much anything. But if they're under 18, what I would do is I would get them to a therapist who number one is an addictions expert. So many times I see people go to a family therapist or go to a marriage counselor to try to fix this stuff. If your husband or wife is a porn addict, a marriage counselor is not going to help that. A marriage counselor has never stopped an addiction. They've never stopped trauma. They've never stopped anxiety. A marriage counselor is there to help you with your finances and figure out a chore chart and all that other stuff. It doesn't have to do with anything medical when you're a marriage counselor. So you need to get, whoever it is, you need to get them to a professional, whether it's a therapist or a counselor or someone who's a coach like me, who can listen to the story and figure out a strategy with that person to get them more help. Now, maybe if the kid's 13 or 14, they have obviously not been an addict very long. You can probably deprogram that pretty easily. If the kid is, 17 years old, it might be a little tougher if they've been looking at pornography 5-6 years. You may have to get them into some kind of program for addiction for children. Even if there isn't any strict porn addiction, there are programs that will deal with alcoholism in children and overeating in children, and you can get them to that. If they're over 17, you basically don't have any rights. You're kind of like a spouse at that point, or a partner, where you can ask and you can create boundaries and you can create ultimatums for them to go get help. But if they don't want to follow it, they're not going to follow it. All you can do is let them know how much you love them, how much you're concerned for them, how you'll be by their side and through them getting help, but that ultimately they need to want to get the help.
Wow, I like that. Thank you. And definitely thank you for giving the distinction between the whole thing about a family therapist and a marriage counselor, because a lot of people will feel like, okay, this has to do with family issues and family drama, so let's go there. So I'm glad you gave that illustration.
And another great place where I think parents need to, step back and look at this logically is that, telling your kids about porn is important in today's day and age. But you have to look at it's not like the birds and the bees speech. You don't have to talk about everything they see in the pornography. You don't have to talk about how babies are made. It's basically just like the don't drink or don't smoke speech. If you can give it age appropriately. You can tell a 5-year-old if they're using a tablet or they're watching TV or whatever, and they see, a naked man or woman or, two people like that. Come and tell mommy and daddy, because, kids aren't supposed to see that stuff. And I want to make sure that you are going to be safe. And, maybe you tell your 5 or 6-year-old, you don't ever let anybody take any pictures of you with your bathing suit or your underwear off. And you don't ever take any pictures of anybody with their bathing suit or their underwear off.
Yeah.
You can leave that as a lesson for a 5-year-old. You don't have to talk about magazines or videos or this is what they're doing or anything like that. Just be very matter of fact. Little kids look for direction. Little kids want to know the right thing to do. And as the kid gets older, you can get a little more explicit and a little more graphic with how you explain it. I believe every 14-year-old boy should learn about porn-induced erectile dysfunction, because I think that if they look at too much porn, essentially their penis can break. I think that might scare a lot of guys away from it.
Yeah,
if they knew before they started that they could injure themselves to the point that they would likely turn partners off or turn partners away, I've got to believe they would think more about their behavior when it comes to pornography when they're younger. Yeah. And maybe we can knock down some of the percentages of porn addicts if we can start talking to kids. That's one of the reasons I'm out there, Brother Leon, is that I think back to like 10-year-old Josh or 12-year-old Josh. What could I have been told? What could I have been shown that would have made a difference? Yeah. That would not have led me down this path. Yeah. I still, at some point, I was going to have to deal with my trauma. That was a given, but I didn't have to put it off for so long with those very unhealthy addictions. And it just wasn't presented to me that was bad. And that's part of why I'm out there now, is to try to stop addiction even before it starts. And that's the role of the parents.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Mr. Shea. Because I'm looking back over my life, I'm like, if I hadn't watched that daggone Cinemax, I probably wouldn't have got into half the mess I got into.
Oh, man. Friday night Cinemax.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I'm looking back. I'm looking at, now the question remains is there anything such as soft porn? I'm like, porn is porn. Honesty. I don't know. Maybe you can break it down.
Yes, it is and it isn't, because there is pornography that we can all agree is pornography. It's that stuff with naked people having sex in ways that normal people never do. It has an X or 3 X's. Yeah. We know what pornography is. However, here's an interesting story from a rehab that I went to, in that before I went, my daughter, she was a teenager when I was in a lot of my addiction, and my wife, they both received the Victoria's Secret catalog. Yeah. Now, Victoria's Secret catalogs, at least 10 years ago, were coming in the mail. It seemed like every day. And it seemed like they were coming for both of them. Now, one thing about me, I was never attracted to women in lingerie. It just never did anything for me. It's not sexy to me. So we could have those catalogs all over our end tables and on our coffee table, and it did nothing for me because I didn't see it as pornography. I didn't see it as sexy. It's super fake to me, and that doesn't do it for me. So I saw Victoria's Secret catalogs as junk mail, as just cluttering up the house.
Yeah.
Now, when I went to rehab, there was an older gentleman. He was probably about 55 or 60 who came in. And on his first day, he said, I'm not sure if I should be here because I don't know if I looked at pornography. But he said, I don't look at, Playboy. I don't look at the internet. He said, I only look at the catalogs for Victoria's Secret that my wife gets.
Yeah.
And so if he's sitting there and that's what he's using to pleasure himself, and he's spending 4 or 5 hours a day, and he's saved over 300 Victoria's Secret catalogs, couldn't you say for him the Victoria's Secret catalog is pornography?
Yeah.
But it's not for me.
Yeah.
So I think that along with the definition that we all agree on what pornography is, it also does come down to every individual person, and it comes down to what is it that scratches that itch in the back of your brain you may not want to admit is there, you may not want to admit to other people is there, but it's about anything that's visual or anything that you can read or anything that you can hear that is used for sexual stimulation. And that can be a Victoria's Secret catalog. It can be a Sports Illustrated magazine. It can be, anything out there.
Yeah.
If it's doing the trick for you and that's why you're using it, it's pornography. What's really the difference between that and the XXX stuff that we know is porn? If the outcome is the same and if you're using it for the same reason, it's the same thing.
Yeah. And I will even throw in there music videos.
Oh, absolutely. Music videos. You look at some of the great literature, people like Henry Miller or Annie Nin and some of these, Lady Chatterley's Lover. There is some really erotic literature out there that, I've heard plenty of people read and treat it basically as pornography. And if that's why you're reading it, if you're pleasuring yourself to it, as far as I'm concerned, it's pornography.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Because I think the one thing that I've seen, and I always thought that, had it not been for the erotic novels, maybe some of our women wouldn't have gotten into the porn addiction. And I've blamed erotic novels, like, authors like Zane and so forth. I was like, oh my God, man, I've never seen so many women go into the whole erotic novel, but then now you're starting to see some of these videos, and the most recent that was controversial is that WAP video. I'm like, oh my God.
Right.
What is happening?
Right.
What is happening?
Could you imagine that when we were kids coming out?
Well, see, the closest thing I got to that was Sir Mix-a-Lot, Baby Got Back, and then another booty. I'm curious to say booty, yo. And another video was
This is the new day.
Yeah, Rex in Effect. Oh my God.
Rump Shaker. That right there. Yeah.
And then MC Hammer
there was
pumps in the bump.
Two Live Crew, Me So Horny, and Ice Cube. Put Your Ass Into It, and a lot of that music. I mean, for me, it sounds great, but I love listening to it. But when it comes to the visuals with it, I mean, you look at a lot of these, like a Cardi B video, and her ass is hanging out the whole time. And and here's the thing, it's like, you and I can handle this. It's not a big deal. We're adults. But what about the 10-year-old girl who's watching?
Exactly.
Is that the way that if I want to get a man, do I have to let him see my butt? And if I want and then maybe it's just a short jump to, if I want a boyfriend, do I have to let him see my butt? Yeah. Well, maybe if I'm on the playground tomorrow, the boys will like me and let me play with them if I show them my butt. And it's not that big of a leap, because what you were doing is sexualizing people young. Yeah. And that's been proven, study after study, for decades, that the earlier you were sexualized, the more problems with your sexual health that you were likely to have. Yeah. And you know what? And Cardi B is beautiful, and I totally like her music. And I think that the videos are actually quite stunning. The cinematography is great, but I do worry that, that there is a 10-year-old little girl watching or a 13-year-old boy watching who, is discovering himself for the first time, and he's going to associate, music with pornography. And yes, sex sells. Sex is always sold, but we also have to do it with some level of discretion.
Yeah.
And I guess there's a censored version of the song, so maybe that's considered discretion, but I don't think there's a censored version of the video.
No. Let me ask you this, and let me give you some applause for that. What do you tell people? Because some people are like, you go to some of these debates, and I've heard debates, coming from the Christian perspective, and debates, with guys who are in porn. I remember I saw a debate with Triple X Church and Ron Jeremy and everything. Mm-hmm. And he was saying, well, if you don't want it, just turn it off. I'm like, how easy is it to just turn it off? I mean, you just act like, okay, turning it off is just the answer to everything. And I'm like, no, it's more complex.
Well, exactly. Here's the turn it off debate. Or this is also comes where people ask me, what does addiction feel like? And I say, I can absolutely explain that to you. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, take your iPhone or your Galaxy or whatever you have, turn up the volume on all the alerts and all the beeps and dings and texts and whatever you get. Turn the volume up on all of them, and then take a Post-it note and put it across the front of your phone, and then put your phone next to you. Now, you cannot look at your phone. This is what the challenge is. And if you're like a typical person, and it probably is even worse the younger you are, you will have a ding or a beep or some kind of alert come up in the first 10, 15 minutes. And you want to look at it, but you can't because the Post-it note's on your phone. Yeah. And then in another 10, 15 minutes, there will be another little alert. And you don't know if it's a text, you don't know if it's somebody liking your Instagram post, or you don't know what it is. And maybe the phone will ring, but you can't answer it. You can't even look to see who's calling. Yeah. The people who have done this experiment last usually only about 90 minutes or about 6 or 7 alerts. They have to rip the Post-it note off their phone and look at it because people are so addicted to their phones. They're so addicted to the tiny bit of information that you get on your phone, whether if somebody likes your picture, oh, that feels good, or somebody texts you something, oh, they're thinking of me. People get micro doses of dopamine every time their phone chimes. Yeah. And they go and they look at it because it makes them feel good. We have a nation that has a very minor addiction to their phones. And like I said, you can see that try this tomorrow. You will learn what it's like. You will learn that you can't just turn it off. Yeah. Don't you think if I could just turn porn off, I would have? Yeah. Wouldn't that have been easy? And Ron Jeremy is really one to speak about having control when it comes to, sexuality. He's sitting in a jail cell right now waiting on like 70 sex charges that have nothing to do with the movies he made, had to do with, his behavior outside. So I'm going to take a pass on sexual health advice from Ron Jeremy.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Mr. Shea. So, Mr. Shea, let me ask you this. How can people get to the place where they realize that they have an addiction? And how can they get to the place where they start dealing with it and get to a place of healing and on that journey, on that road towards that journey of becoming whole, hopefully?
Well, the first part is to admit to yourself you have a problem. Anybody can tell you you're an addict. Anybody can tell you you have a problem. But until you recognize it, until you admit it, until you come to terms with it, nothing's really going to happen. So you have to be able to look in the mirror and be completely honest with yourself and say, yes, I do have a problem. Once you're able, and that can take years, but once you're able to do that, it's then a matter of figuring out where is your problem? What is it? What's really happening? I always tell people you should do two things. Number one, go to your regular doctor and get a full blood panel done. If you feel like your problem is getting worse, if things are happening, you should find out if this is a symptom of something else. So, wear out the idea that it's a physical problem. If you go and get a blood test and they run a complete blood panel and it comes back perfectly fine, then this is related to your mental health and potentially, your chemical health. So you need to go talk to somebody at that point who is an expert, like I said earlier, therapist, counselor, coach like I am, to figure out and to talk to and figure out exactly how the issue is. Where are you? Are you in the early stages of addiction? Are you in the ongoing stages? Are you in the critical phases of addiction where, an intervention is needed immediately? You need to talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about. And then I also urge people to find somebody who has been through the problem, whether it's drug addiction or porn addiction or whatever it is. Find somebody who has gone through it and find somebody who is further along than you and has been successful, because they will show you it's possible. One of the things is when you are an addict and you decide you're going to get help, you have to face the fact that the one thing that always made you feel better has been taken away from you. So you don't know how you're going to deal with things when they go bad, because that thing that always helped you with stress, that thing that always helped you with anxiety, it's gone. You can't use it anymore. You can't snort it or smoke it or masturbate to it or eat it or gamble it. You can't do that anymore. So you have to learn new skills. That's really a scary part, but having somebody who's been there, who has been successful, can really help. And I think that may be one of the reasons why a lot of porn addicts come to me for coaching, is because not only do I have the expert side of things, obviously I know the statistics, I know the chemistry, I know the medicine, but I also was there. I was an addict. I was a gaslighter for years. I lied about it. I manipulated people. I hurt a lot of people when I was an addict. And I now try to help people because I recognize what happened with me. And I think that I speak a language to guys and to women, about being a porn addict and about recovering from porn addiction in a way that somebody who is just a expert, who just studied it in school, doesn't really know, because they haven't actually been there. So I sort of bring both sides to the table for people. And I think that's what people need. People need emotional support from somebody who understands their plight, but they also need an objective step-by-step way to get to healing. And when you can mix those two things together, well, I think the results, you're going to get better results than you would any other way.
Wow. Thank you for that, Mr. Shea. Thank you for that. Because I know a lot of times, when you're dealing with addiction, it's like, man, will I ever see the light at the end of the tunnel? So.
Oh, it's hard. It's hard because, like I said, the one thing that you always counted on, I counted on the same thing when I was 13 or 23 or 33. Now, my life was radically different each time, but pornography was always there. It was always the one thing that I could count on. I mean, that and the alcohol, but that was the thing I could always count on to be there. It didn't matter if I was in school or if I had a job or if I was married or if I had a girlfriend or nobody. No matter where I was in my life, whether it was a magazine or a video or the internet, pornography was always there. And it was always there to make me feel better. And when suddenly I am faced with a world that I can't look at it, I have to figure out pretty quickly how to deal with the negativity in my life. Yeah. And because I don't have this thing anymore. And the best way to do that is to then go and do that hard trauma work. Figure out, why did you become an addict? and what led to you becoming an addict and what were you coping with. Addiction is only a symptom of a bigger problem. If you can deal with that bigger problem, you won't have the triggers and you won't have the lure of that addiction anymore.
Wow. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Mr. Shea, how can people get a hold of you for coaching, to also purchase your book, and as well as follow you on social media?
Yeah, best way. I try to make it easy for people. My website is paddictrecovery.com. That's P like pornography. paddictrecovery.com. If you want to find me on Twitter or Instagram, again, it's paddictrecovery. Want to drop me an email, it's paddictrecovery@gmail.com. My website, paddictrecovery.com, that has links to all of my books on Amazon. You can also just check my name on Amazon or any of your other places, Barnes & Noble, any place you buy books. But it also has resources. If you want to know more about 12 steps or rehab or therapy, if you want more to read, there's all that stuff there. And of course, if you are interested in coaching, whether it's, my first time I talk to people, I do it for free, so they can see if we jive well, if we mix. So there's no risk whatsoever. There's no obligation. If you want to get in touch with me and talk to me about what's going on, all the information about my coaching is there, also at paddictrecovery.com. So anything having to do with pornography addiction, you're probably going to find some information or some help at my website.
All right. Thank you for that. Mr. Shea, do you also go to churches or organizations?
I do. And now I am just starting to get booked again now that I don't want to say when we're recording this, COVID isn't over, but it's starting to look like we're, able to hang out in big groups again with, football season starting and whatnot. So I'm out there. I'm trying to get into colleges. I love libraries. I love churches. Because I will tell you, I have never, and I swear to God to you, I have never done an event where either after the event somebody comes up and tells me they're a porn addict or that they have the betrayal trauma, or within 24 hours somebody emails me who was at the presentation. There are so many more people in this world who are suffering with porn addiction or suffering with betrayal trauma than we know. And we need to start talking about it as a society if we're ever going to move forward. So I do have to thank you, Brother Leon, for letting me on your show, giving me access to your listeners. This is a problem that we need to tackle as a society.
Mr. Shea, thank you. It has definitely been a pleasure having you on. And we definitely got to do this again. I think I might want to bring you to our online church. That's the God knows truth.
I would love to. I did a presentation for an online church about 3 months ago, and it went fantastic.
Okay. Well, yeah, we're definitely going to work on that. But I just want to say thank you, Mr. Shea. I so appreciate you. You have yourself a blessed day.
All right. It was great to finally talk to you.
All right. Be blessed. Thank you, sir. Let me give you some applause.
All right. Yay.
All right, Mr. Shea. See you later. All right.
Bye now.
All right. Guys, that was Joshua Shea. He brought the thunder today. And that's the one thing that I want you guys to understand and know. The Bible says that you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. So today we heard about addiction. And a lot of times it has to do with what's going on in our heads. A lot of times you can trace it back to trauma. But the one thing about addiction is that once it grips you, you got to work on getting free. And that's the God knows truth. So if it means healing, getting some healing and some therapy to handle the issues, handle the issues. And that's the God knows truth. Because number one, it's a journey. And that journey to freedom is definitely worth the work. And so I so appreciate Mr. Joshua Shea. So guys, be blessed.
Walk in the truth that makes you free every day. Follow Brother Leon on all social media outlets.